Sucede que a veces somos tremendamente afortunados en contar con jefes, líderes que no solo dejan huella en nuestra vida, sino que nos ayudan a comprender lo que ser un líder es en realidad. Ese es el caso de mi invitada el día de hoy. Ella fue mi jefa directa hace varios años cuando lanzamos la operación de Twitter en México. Y a pesar de la enorme distancia entre México y Singapur, ella siempre estuvo presente compartiendo su conocimiento de la industria y mostrando con el ejemplo lo que una gran líder debe hacer. Acompáñenme a aprender, de la autora de Don't Quit Your Day Job, la extraordinaria Aliza Knox. Aliza, I have to say, I am so happy to have you on the show today. Thank you for making time for us.
It's a pleasure to do this, Efraín, and to have a reason to talk since we don't get to work together anymore.
It's. Can you believe it's already been like 7 years, 6 or 7 years since we last saw each other?
No, it's too long. And one of the things I realize, I don't know if today's conversation will go to my biggest regrets, but one of them is not speaking another language. So I wish I could do the interview in Spanish or in a mixture of Spanish and English, but I won't be able to.
That's fine, don't worry. We'll get to work on that someday. But in the meantime, I am very lucky to have met you a few years ago, worked with you, and actually reported to you. I was sharing that in the intro. So I've had the privilege to know you personally. But for the folks who are watching this and listening to us, can you share a little about Aliza Knox's story, your history, the path that you walked through in the last years that have brought you to this point in your life and your career?
That's kind of a how long is a piece of string. I've been working for a long time, so I could talk forever. But I guess the brief summary is I'm on what I would consider Aliza 3.0. So having worked in tech, I've learned, that there are software releases. So after I went to university, I'm pretty obviously from my accent American. I don't even think you'd mistake me for Canadian. I spent the first part of my career in financial services and consulting. So most of it was at the Boston Consulting Group. I started in New York and really had a thirst for adventure. So after about 6 years there, I got myself a job in Australia, primarily because I'd spent 6 months in England during university and it was cold and rainy and I ate a lot of soggy vegetables. And I determined that that was not a good place for me. I like the sun. So I had to look, and as I mentioned at the beginning, I don't really have any language skills, unfortunately, despite years of taking French. And so I thought I better go to someplace that speaks English and is sunny. And Florida is still in the United States. So I found myself a job in Sydney and off I went. And so the bulk of that first part of my career was the Boston Consulting Group and then Schwab and Visa. I did move to the US, back to the US for a little while for Schwab and Visa. So that was 1.0. Then I can tell another story later about serendipity because I think there's a lot of it in our careers, but along the way, I met some people in tech, had a chance to switch and went to work at Google on the proviso that my family could go back to Asia. So I spent Aliza 2.0 at Google, Twitter, and Cloudflare, 3 big tech firms with a small interim at a startup in Asia, building Asia for those tech firms. And I consider that to be Aliza 2.0. In the midst of COVID and a big birthday, I thought, maybe it's time to do something else through a sort of the vagary of a bunch of visa situations, nothing illegal, but just the way Singapore worked during COVID. My kids couldn't get into the country. There was quarantine in most places to go to see people, and I just felt like sitting at my desk all day and not being able to travel was not something I wanted anymore. Obviously, a lot of people didn't have the choice. I was lucky to be at a point in my career where I thought, I can do something else. And so I now have embarked on Aliza 3.0, which is Unclear. So far, I had already been sitting on corporate boards. So I'm still sitting on corporate boards, 2 private, 2 public, 2 in Australia, 2 in Singapore. I wrote the book that you mentioned, so I'll just hold it up here, which is hard with a blurred background, but don't quit your day job. I've been writing for Forbes, a monthly column in Forbes. I did 1 stint at teaching. I might do it again, I'm not sure. I'm doing some very official mentoring. A woman I've been working with for 4 years who's Afghan, who I met while she was at university in Bangladesh, and we got her out of Kabul last summer, and she's now at a university in the US. And another young Australian female athlete, because what happens in a lot of countries, particularly Australia, we really revere our sports people. And then after their sports career, particularly women, there's kind of nothing for them. So it's great if business people can guide them along the way so that when they do finish in sports, they have something else to do. Makes it sound like they're clueless. They're not, but they just haven't had time to focus on other things. So that's a smattering of what I'm doing and basically trying to figure out what to do when I grow up.
I love that. I love that you mentioned that, because it's funny, but for how long have we mistakenly thought that our careers had to have like a beginning and an end, and we had to be very specialized on one single path, right? And they made us believe that for a while. And one of the things that I love sharing in this podcast is that we all have the possibility. We have to understand that our careers are not a straight line, but rather it's like, it goes all over the place. And then you go up, you go down, you go back, you go forwards, you go to the left, you go to the right, and it's squiggly, right? And you end up creating the life that you want, and not just the career that you want. And one thing that I take away from what you just shared is, you in a way, and I love how you put it, like Aliza 3.0, 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. And it was like you are making sure that you live your life as you want, and the life that you want. And I love that you say, when I grow up, I want to do something else, and I'm trying to figure that out, because we're always working on figuring things out, right? It's not like we're all done, ready.
Well, and the other thing, I think, we're living longer, so probably most people's working careers are a lot longer than they thought. I was interviewed by a woman in Australia this week for the book, and she said, she's a journalist and she's in her 70s and she loves it. She said, I want to keep doing this. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to experiment with different things. Have you read The Squiggly Career? Did you, there is
No, I haven't.
bestseller.
I haven't read that one.
Okay, there is one called The Squiggly Career out of London. So it might be something for you and your readers to look at after they've read Don't Quit Your Day Job. But it's about the thesis that you're saying. And, I don't think it's just a ladder anymore. And I think what you're saying is right. There are just lots of options. And, if you look at my career from 1.0 to 2.0, maybe I'll just tell that story. But I was working at Visa, the payments company. Mm-hmm. And I think we used to call it credit card company, but it's really, it's all sorts of payments. Mm-hmm. And I met Vint Cerf, who's one of the real founders of the internet, because we were trying to do a deal with Google. And I wrote him the thank you note from the meeting, the appropriate thank you note from the meeting. Sorry, there is a cat. I got my room ready for this, but I didn't manage to get rid of the cat. So there's a cat jumping on me. And I wrote him the appropriate thank you note. And then I thought, I'm in the Bay Area. I am working in financial services, which I like, but which I've been in for some time. And there's this internet thing going on around me. And I think I'm missing out. I think there's something really exciting here. I guess. And I should be participating. So I somewhat audaciously wrote him a note from my personal email saying, hey, hope you don't mind, but I'm curious about Google to learn more and whether you would ever, consider hiring somebody like me. I'm obviously further along in my career, but I do know a lot about sales and marketing, even if I haven't been in online media. And that's what led to a long series of chats with Google and eventually my going to work there, and then this whole Aliza 2.0. And so what's interesting to me about that, and for other people, I think two main points. One is there is a lot of serendipity in our careers. It's not necessarily the kind of serendipity where, someone sees Kate Moss in an airport, discovers her, and she becomes a global model. I'm still waiting for that kind of serendipity, but I'm open if anybody's watching, I'm happy to do that. But it's kind of opportunity plus action. I didn't seek out meeting Vint, but I happened to meet him. I mean, maybe I should have sought it out, but I didn't. I happened to meet him and it was like, hey, a light bulb went off in my head. I can do something with this. I asked if it was okay. I asked him like if he was uncomfortable with my reaching out, he would have said no. So I think there's a lot that happens in your career where you can make these changes, whether or not you planned it. And then to also be slightly brave to do it, I guess. For me to go from where I was to Google, I took an enormous title cut. I was an SVP on my way to EVP because that's how financial services companies were. I became a director at Google. I took something of a pay cut and made a bet on equity, which of course in the case of Google was a fantastic bet, but I didn't know it at the time. And I did have somebody at a really well-respected executive search firm say to me, you're brave, which I think meant was a nice way of her saying, you might be kind of foolish. You're pretty far along in your career, you've got a big job, and you're taking this punt. But in the end, and she's smart, and she did make me think twice about it, but I just thought, you know what, I really am curious, I really want to learn, I'm gonna take this plunge, and if it doesn't work, maybe I can go back to financial services. So I think the 2 pointers for people who think about it is, one, you get these opportunities, think about them when they happen, you can make something happen. And two,
of course,
yeah, you have to be maybe a little brave to think, okay, I'm going off this ladder, but it often works out. And I think, it's so much more common now for people to switch jobs a lot, to switch career paths. And so you can do it and you're not stuck.
Of course, you just reminded me of two things. One, a lesson that I keep sharing with my daughter as much as possible, and is take risks, raise your hand, ask for what you want. Don't stay there watching and allow others to decide. Take the risk, just take the risk. Worst that can happen, nothing happens, right? So raise your hand and go for it, And the other thing that you remind me, I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, but you know that a few years ago, Bint trolled me in a meeting at Google. He was visiting the Google Mexico office, and we were we had a round table with Bint, and we had a series of events, and we're recording a video, and actually it's on my YouTube channel. We're recording a video, Q&A. Hey, Q&A with one of the fathers of the internet. It's like, come on, you have to be there, right? And and I was asking him, I was telling him, our kids are going to study you in books, just like we had to study Tesla, for instance. Our kids are going to study you. And we were discussing, and he interrupts me and said, I'm sorry, you said you are disgusting? So I have the honor of having been trolled by Bint.
Well, that is an honor, and I think we probably will study him. Actually, Absolutely. 10 years into my tech career, I guess I had started at Cloudflare, and we were watching there's some videos you watch when you start to get oriented, learn about the product, and one of them has Vint Cerf in it. So it prompted me to write him another thank you note. I mean, I wrote one after I started at Google, but then I wrote him another one saying, Vint, just so you know, I've now been in tech for 10 years and it's all thanks to you. And he wrote back. It was really nice. So people do respond. You think about somebody like him or Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who often used to come and talk at Cloudflare events, and they are just human beings. They're really famous human beings, but they do often respond when people reach out to have them for Q&A or to chat with them about careers, which is another good reminder. Because as you're right, you raise your hand, you ask. If they say no, you move on. But sometimes, that's the worst they can say. And sometimes people say yes.
Exactly.
And I often, go ahead.
No, go ahead, please.
No, I often remind, especially younger people. So my kids are in their early 20s. So I end up spending a lot of time talking to their friends and then my friends' kids, who are the same age, who get so nervous about asking for things, asking for a raise or negotiating in their first job or asking people for help. And I say, oftentimes the worst that's going to happen is no. They get worried that the job offer is going to be withdrawn, to which I say, usually if they've gone to the effort of making you a job and deciding they want you, especially in today's really tough, really tight job market, they're not going to withdraw it. They're just going to say no. Or, you ask somebody for a meeting, especially if you're pretty specific about what you want. If you just say, I want to meet you, maybe that's hard. But, I've seen your career as a woman, or I've seen that you're really an expert in music and data science, which is really interesting to me. Could you spare 15 minutes to talk to me? Most people respond really well to that. And, often younger people are afraid of asking, but actually people respond well. And it's interesting. I had somebody reach out to me on LinkedIn whom I've never met. I guess about a year ago. She was having a lot of difficulty at work. She'd heard me speak at something. She used the fact that we had both worked at BCG, but not at the same time, to create a connection. And I said, sure, I'd try to help. And I have talked to her a couple of times, gotten to know her a little. And in the course of that, she also mentioned she knew somebody who's quite well known in Singapore whom I'd never met. And I said, I'd actually love an introduction to that gentleman, and I'd love to talk to him sometime. And so I certainly had not responded to her in order to meet this other guy. But because she threw it out there in the conversation, I took her up on it. So, it just goes to show that often the people you think you're asking for a favor and they are going to say no and they get nothing out of it. So why would they do it? They even can get stuff out of it. So I think, not being afraid, raising your hand, as you say, is a great approach. And hopefully more and more people are learning to do that.
I certainly hope so. It makes a huge difference, no? And just take the risk. So speaking of risks and speaking of, collaborating with people that we know and people that we haven't yet met, over the years, you have collaborated with some of the brightest minds in marketing and in sales, in both offline and online arenas. So who would you say were, our one or two people besides Bint and Surf who have made quite an impression on you that kind of help you set your career?
Well, so interestingly, I don't know if I had somebody who helped me set my career that way, because I moved so broadly. I probably had people I looked at BCG who had a very different kind of career than in digital. But I was thinking about a person I know named Frederick Covington, who was head of marketing for Twitter in Asia Pacific and is now the CMO of Visa. And it's interesting because when you think about the digital world, and you think about great marketers, Gary Briggs and Ariane Dyke, who's now at Booking.com, and Lorraine Toohill, those are all people from Google. They're amazing. And Adam Bain, who ran sales at Twitter, they're all amazing, but they also all are in kind of the digital world. What was interesting to me about Freddie is she left Twitter, a digital native firm, and moved to Visa, which, although it's payments and fintech is kind of all the rage right now, it is an old company, which, it's not as old as Procter & Gamble or Schlumberger, but it's older. And it's a bit more traditional. It used to be a co-op of 15,000 banks and is now a public company. So I had worked there before I met her at Twitter. She went to Visa completely separately to me and is there now and is the CMO. And what she did was she took a company that was not that digital and made it more digital, really helped it to enter, I think, a much more modern era in terms of branding. So they just did a global brand repositioning. So first she went with a role in Asia, and now she's the global CMO. So she took Visa from being a credit card, which is, I'm trying to call it payments because that's what you should call it now, but I think people used to call it credit card, to a network working for everyone. So that's a new brand positioning, very much more modern and in keeping with where fintech is going right now. They took the Visa visual identity and turned it on its head. If you look it up, they've really changed the brand symbol. So they've honored the Visa visual heritage, but really incorporated the values of tech, which they consider to be for payments, access for everybody and equality. And then they've also launched, you could say maybe this is just a bit more trendy. We all have to decide what our opinion is of this, but they've launched a CryptoPunk NFT. Yeah. So for me, that's really interesting because she didn't rest easy in a digital world that she knew. She went to a somewhat challenging environment that wasn't fully digital. I think Visa would say they were mostly digital. It's clearly an online, there's in-store, but there's also card not present payment. They're not a manufacturer, but they were not as digital as they needed to be. And she really transformed it. And so to me, that's been quite eye-opening. I'm not a marketer, but I do sit on boards, and I absolutely have a strong sales and marketing background. And I look at that as I think about other firms that I'm involved with and what we need to be able to do. And it's really impressive what she's done. Obviously with her team. She would be the first to give credit to her full and very strong team, but it's a good example.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I'm thinking about that and thinking about, all the learnings that we can take from experiences like hers and like yours, of course. And one of the things that I wanted to discuss with you in this episode is, throughout the years, you have been a very important thought leader in many companies around many subjects, from sales to marketing to customer experience. You've been an amazing leader. I can attest to that. And you built.
I have a fan club sign up, right? I'll send it to you later.
There you go. So now all that experience and all those learnings you are sharing in your book, Don't Quit Your Day Job. Can you share more about the book? What it's about? Because you talk about, certain specific mindsets, right? In this book. So why don't you share a little about that? Because I know that once it is available, like I'm already in the pre-order for Amazon in Mexico. So as soon as it gets here, like I'm just savoring it already. But what will we read on it? What's it about?
Thanks for the prompt, for the question. So I won't share all 6 because if I do, then you don't need to read the book. But I can share some. And I guess let me pick just a couple. First, I'd like to say I don't think the book, Don't Quit Your Day Job, is a catchy title, and it's particularly relevant now in the middle of the Great Resignation. But I am not really telling people to never quit their day job. What it's really about is most of us are going to spend at least several decades working for somebody else, right? Most of us need to earn a living. Some people are entrepreneurs, some people do an individual gig, but most of us end up in government or a large organization or a large social welfare group or a hospital, or, this refers to any kinds of organizations. And it has people in here in healthcare, in academia, probably a little overweight in tech firms, because that's where, I've spent my most recent years. And it has examples of people from ages 22 to late 60s, of people from Latin America. Maria Brisa's in it, if you remember her from Twitter.
Of course.
To Europeans, men, women. So lots of ethnicities. So hopefully, by way of using example, I've made it very relatable to all sorts of people. So it's not just my stories, my view. I have lots of stories, but I think they might get boring. It's lots of different people's stories and how they approach things. So one of the things that I like to talk about is go for both. Your work and your life are on the same team. Because I think a lot of people, we talk about work-life balance as if it's a seesaw, as if one goes up, the other has to go down. And of course, there are limits. There's only 24 hours a day. I've been applying for 28 hours a day consistently, but nobody's answered me. So to the extent that we're stuck with 24 hours a day, you can't do everything, but you can do a lot of things. And sometimes things work for both your career and your life. So a couple examples there. So one example is me. I graduated from college, went to live in New York, worked in a bank training program, or worked at a bank, was in a training program. That was my first job. And I have since learned to do aerobics and, a couple other sports, but I played badminton, but at that time, I mostly swam for exercise. So in Manhattan, there really were not places to swim. There was the Downtown Athletic Club, which had a quota on people under 25. No longer a problem for me, but it was then. There was a chain called the New York Health and Racquet Club, where you went to do aerobics, and then you got in a pool the size of like a large coffee mug, those big ones you can get at Starbucks, and jumped in to show off your body after exercising, but there was no way you could swim laps. But near my apartment in the Village, New York University had built a huge new gymnasium, which had an amazing pool. The catch was you had to be a student to use it. And I had just graduated from college, and I was in a bank training program. So I was like, wow, what am I going to do? In the end, with another friend, I bit the bullet. We applied for the MBA program. I thought, well, maybe I'll get credits and go to Stanford for my MBA because I grew up near there and I really had always wanted to go there. And I got to swim. So fast forward 4 years later, I had an MBA. I had probably lost out a bit on sleep. My apartment smelled like chlorine, but the bank had paid for it, so no debt. And I got to use the pool. And then when I went, I finally decided, okay, I'm moving overseas. I'm going to get this job in Australia. I'm going to BCG. I had an MBA. Well, consulting firms, I hadn't been doing this for consulting. I didn't even know what consulting was. But when I was saying, okay, what could I do there? Someone said, well, you can do consulting. You have an MBA now. So it's kind of funny, I did this thing to swim, but it enabled me to get my next job. And you might say, okay, that's a bit funny, that's a bit light. But then there's another story in the book of an academic in California who got a fellowship for a teaching job in Rome, did the job for a year, wanted to apply. There's a more senior fellowship there that requires some business capabilities. And they said to her, we really like you, but you're really an academic. You're used to research and individual achievement, and you don't have the business experience that we need for this job. And she was quite disappointed. She went back, kept teaching in LA. She likes her job, but she really wanted this position in Rome. And so when she was back in LA, she was thinking, well, what other things can I do just out of my personal interest to kind of add spice to my life, if you will. And she started volunteering with the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, which is about freedom of speech and social justice. And she went on their board. She eventually became chairman of their board. This was all just for her personal views of what needed to change in the United States. And the job came up again in Rome a few years ago. And she thought, you know what, I'm just going to throw my hat in the ring one more time. I really want to go for it. And it turned out that her board experience at the ACLU in Southern California gave her all the skills that they had thought she didn't have the first time for the job in Rome. And now she's happily got that position in Rome. So again, she did not go to ACLU because she thought, oh, maybe in 8 or 10 years' time, that'll give me skills I want for this job I didn't get. It was just something she did because she cared about it in life. And it ended up not only paying her back in terms of her view that she's contributing something to the American social fabric, but it helped her get this job. So there are lots of times that works. And there's lots of other categories of this. It's not just the outside things you do to balance your career and life, but those are two great examples.
I love that. Have I ever shared with you my theory about our virtual bat belt? Remember Batman's bat belt? His utility belt, where he used to carry like the Batarang and even the spray against sharks, the shark repellent.
We need that in Australia.
Yeah, you do. I hold the promise that the premise that we all have our own virtual bat belt or utility belt. And just like Batman had, think about construction workers and, these huge leather belts that they wear with the hammer and the screwdrivers, etc., with all their tools. we have something similar, but instead of filling it up with these tools, what we do is we virtually fill it up with the lessons that we learn, with the experiences that we live, with the programs that we study, the books that we read, the people that we surround us with, and the conversations that we have, and all that, those experiences and all those lessons, and every decision that we make, goes into this virtual utility belt, and we integrate them as skills, and right, and those skills we put in service of other things later in life, and sometimes we're not really aware of how and when we're going to use that, and sometimes we even think like, why bother? Like, right. Why am I doing this? But then 10 years in the future, you realize like, wow, I'm very happy that I lived through that experience, because now I have this skill in my virtual utility belt that I can use and put in service of this situation.
That's really interesting. And I think another thing that's, we're talking about longer careers and your virtual skills. I think a lot of people are spending more time learning. I mean, it's kind of funny the way we were brought up, our generation, or probably older than you, but our generations is you go to university till you're 22 or whatever, maybe you get a master's, and then you've crammed everything in your head, and the rest is either on the job apprenticeship or no more learning. And because people are changing jobs maybe every few years, which is much more acceptable now, and having squiggly careers, as you said, I think there also are more opportunities to learn, and maybe even some more pressure to learn. But I see it as opportunities. You get to learn new things. And I've got a friend in Australia named Peter Tanner, who I work with at BCG in Sydney. He has been incredibly successful. He's been a CEO. He's chairman of a lot of boards. He's a great investor. And he just posted on LinkedIn that he finished his 2-year advanced data analytics course at Harvard online. Here's a guy who doesn't need to do anything else, right? But he thinks it'll help him in the stuff that he's doing, it probably will, and who just wants to keep learning. So the nice thing about your tool belt is that you can keep adding to it, right?
Of course, always, all the time.
And that's kind of fun. And I think, especially, I think there was already so much learning online, but then particularly because of the pandemic, we're able to access things that we once couldn't access that without going somewhere live. So I think that's particularly great.
Absolutely.
If I switch to another learning, I have a chapter titled Connection Trumps Tech Savvy, Even in Tech. And you and I are both the learners and recipients of this, I think, which it doesn't mean that you don't need technology and tech. And I think the more you understand about your products, and even for those of us in sales and marketing, who don't have to code to understand about what our product does and how it works, is good. And the more you know, the better. But I still think there's a lot about, and maybe this is old-fashioned, but I don't think so, about human relationships that makes things work. And a story I'll tell about that is there's a young woman I know who works for a huge tech firm in the Bay Area, a name that everybody would recognize. She's a female engineer, which is sort of a rare commodity. So, they really want her. She worked 2 summers at this firm, did a great job. They made her a full-time offer. And she came back in this full-time job, and after 3 months got a new manager. And I would have to say, based on her description, and I've only heard one side, the manager was probably a bit of a jerk, or maybe in a kinder way, he was very demoralizing and didn't know how to manage. And he was pretty abusive. She went to HR to ask what to do. She said, I have no concrete feedback. He's just saying these things to me. So he created a Google Doc and made it look like he'd been giving feedback all along, put dates in, but she could tell that he'd put those in later. You can do that in Google Docs. And it was a real, said, I've been telling her these things and she's not responding. It was a very difficult situation. So she called me up, and I guess, in the end, that's why I've written this book, is I spent a lot of time with people, besides my official mentees, just trying to help out. They come to me either because I'm a woman or because I've been around a long time or whatever. And she was like, I'm going to have to leave. I'm going to have to leave this company. I really like it, but I have to go. And I said, I don't think you have to go. This is a big company. Your reputation isn't ruined. You know people there, right? You know people from the first 2 internships. And in her case, sort of like the Vint Cerf thing, she had met at some social gathering for the company and found a small connection with the chief product officer, who at this point was, I don't know, 7 or 8 levels above her. And so we worked together on how she could reach out to the 3 of them, because she didn't feel like she was getting support from HR. And she reached out and said, listen, I really love this company. I'm really unhappy in my role. I can't stay, in this role, but I'd like to do some other things. Here are things I could think about, would you be willing to help me? And they did. She ended up getting 2 alternative offers within that firm. And she's really happy again. So, it's not always true. Sometimes you have to leave when there's a bad situation. And I think another whole lesson about there is, that I have a lot of in the book, or not a lot, I'm not an expert, but is fighting back when you've been wronged, and sometimes it's serious and you need legal expertise and psychological expertise, neither of which I have. But in something like this, I was able to help. And you can see that because she'd made these connections before, and 2 of them, they'd seen her work, but the other one, he hadn't. He had just met her and had some small personal connection, and she wrote to him and said, can you help? And they did. So, and of course, there's a much more mundane stuff, like you and I formed a friendship, when we met in Mexico, and it made it so much easier to get work done across borders. You're in the wrong time zones. It's a little bit of a hassle. You're probably thinking, what is she telling me to do? But because we've met, it's more like, okay, you probably think, oh, maybe she doesn't understand, as opposed to like, this woman's, just driving me crazy. So I really believe that connectivity and connection is important. And I do discuss in the book, and I had written some of the Forbes articles about how to keep building that even during the pandemic. It's getting better. I notice people are getting on planes, they're meeting in person again. But I think we'll all probably try to travel less. It hurts the environment. We've seen we can get more done. So I think then we have to make more effort to get to know people over VC or in some other ways too. But I really personally believe it's important.
Absolutely, 100%. I'll call ours the guacamole connection, because you and I both are fans of guacamole.
That's true, even though I pronounce it wrong.
Aliza, speaking about advice, and I think that the advice that you shared with this person was amazing. It was really good. And you have so much to share on different subjects. But imagine that, remember Back to the Future? Remember Doc Brown? Imagine that he goes to your home and hands you the keys to the DeLorean, and you could travel back in time. To what point in your life would you travel back to visit your younger self, and to say what? What piece of advice would you share with Aliza a few years ago?
So I have 2 answers to that. One is, if I could go to my I'd like to go to my parents, but my 5-year-old self, put myself in an immersion language school. So I really feel that people who speak more than one language have a huge advantage. Not just the language, they understand somebody else's culture. I think it expands your brain. I think it does wonderful things. And, I'm very embarrassed to be an American who doesn't speak other languages. As a consequence, we put our kids who are Caucasian in a Chinese immersion school, and they both speak fluent Mandarin.
That's great.
But just because it was, I think we thought we would spend a lot of our life in Asia, but it was just, that's a really great language. It's a character-based language. It's, it just really makes you think differently. And the good thing, my husband's Australian, we were particularly worried about it when we were moving to the US for a while. If you're in a Chinese school, the character for China is a square with a line through it. China calls itself Middle Earth, or the center of the earth. So, Americans tend to think we're the center of the world. China thinks it's the center of the world. So at least my kids are mixed up. At least they know there's 2 countries that think this. So, they get a worldview. So before lockdown, before pandemic, I really wanted them to have a view that they were globo sapiens. And I just think a second language is really important. So for parents, for anybody else, your daughter's lucky, you're great, you have at least 2 languages. I just feel that's really important. If I go to a slightly older self, as much as I got a lot about financial services working at Visa, I wish I'd made the jump to Google a bit earlier. You were talking about taking risk and being brave. As I said, I didn't pursue Vint Cerf. I just happened to meet him. The timing was good, but if I thought about it a couple years earlier and been even braver, I could have gone to a place like Google, or at the time Yahoo was still doing well, and said, hey, I know a bit about financial services. Maybe that doesn't help you. I know a lot about sales and marketing. Maybe that does help you. Could I do something? I would have loved to have been in tech a bit earlier. I guess the good news, looking back on it, is I do regret not having a second language. I'm not sure I could have done much. I still keep thinking about doing something about it. I don't regret, not leaving Visa and going to Google, but it would have been nice to do it earlier. And one of the things that I do talk about in the book is also, I think people can over-index on these decisions, particularly young people. As I've been helping friends of my kids who are graduating from college and watching them completely agonize about decisions. And especially in your early career, I think there aren't a lot of wrong decisions, and they're reparable if you really don't like them, right? No one's expecting you to go, I think there's still some career longevity in some cultures like Japan. A lot of people do still stay longer at their firms. But if you want to leave after a year or 2 years, I think it's good to try to stay a year and a half so that you've learned something, but nobody looks askance at you. And if you'll permit me to tell one more story, there's a friend of my son's named Emily who graduated, came to me. It's like, I got this job offer in San Francisco. And first of all, I don't know if it's enough money. I don't think I can survive on it. And second of all, I don't know if I want this job, but it's the only offer I've had in a while because she graduated in the middle of the beginning of COVID. So now the job market's tight, but it wasn't at that time. And so we talked about two things. We talked about negotiating for a higher salary. She was so scared to do it. She thought she'd lose her job. I said, they've already invested in you. You're not going to lose it. She did ask. She didn't get it, but she didn't lose the offer. I have another much better negotiating for salary story in the book where someone did get it and it made me really happy. It was just fantastic. But so she took the job, even though she wasn't positive, went to San Francisco. She was in Florida, liked it for a while, and then really found she didn't like it. There was some reorganization, the nature of her job changed, and really found she did not like the role. It was pretty miserable. And I talked to her quite a bit, and I thought she should try to stay a year, but she just felt she couldn't do it. And she's now at a company called Huron Consulting, working for them in San Francisco and loving it. But the interesting thing is, she got that job at Huron partly because of what she learned at the first job that she didn't like as much. So you could say, okay, that first job was a bad decision. She didn't love it. Or you could say, you know what? She made a decision. She went for something. She did have options. You can leave. It's not the end of the world, even when it's your first job and you haven't been there a whole year. And she's gone on to something she loves. So I do try to tell particularly younger people, but I think young is, well into your 40s now. Don't agonize too much.
Absolutely.
You can switch. You're not stuck. You have lots of options.
Absolutely. It's amazing, the how much weight we take off of ourselves when we realize that we are not trees. We can move. We actually can move, right? It's amazing. Aliza, I want to be very, very mindful of your time, and we have still have a few minutes before we go into the last few questions. Where can people who are listening to us or watching us, where can they get the book and connect with you, follow you, and follow your columns in Forbes, etc.?
So there's this thing called Google. And if you look me up, there aren't a lot of me because my name is Aliza and then Knox. So I'm on Twitter as Aliza Knox. I'm on LinkedIn as Aliza Knox. I have a website, alizaknox.com, and my book is on Amazon. It'll be in some bookstores, not sure about Mexico. So for Mexico, maybe Amazon is the best place to get it. Booktopia also has it. If you can't find it, email me. I'd be happy to, or reach out to me on any of those platforms, and I'd be happy to tell you where to find it. I'm eager for readership and feedback. And each chapter has 4 or 5 power perspectives, and at the end, a number of takeaways. So there are specific action items, things to suggest that you do.
That's great.
That are hopefully helpful.
I'm really looking forward to reading it as soon as it gets here. So 2 more questions for you before we say goodbye.
Sure.
I want to talk about habits and routines. One other premise that I hold very dear is that for someone to be as productive as you are, you necessarily have to build a certain set of routines and habits that allow you to do as many things as you do and maintain, those very high levels of energy that you have. There's only a very few people that I know who have so much energy as you. So what are the habits and routines that you've built that allow you to do so much?
I'm wondering if this is the pot calling the kettle black. As somebody who's raising a kid, has a podcast, has a big executive role, I think you might be able to share as well. But since you're interviewing me, I think I can think of 3 things. So one is I exercise every day, mostly just I guess it's a good way for me to get out the extra energy. I either go to the gym or I play badminton or I swim. Obviously, I still swim, just not every day. I carve out time in my schedule for it. And, because I've been working in different time zones and headquarters for most of my life, it might be that I have a 6 a.m. meeting or a 10 p.m. meeting or both. And so I'll go to the gym in the middle of the day, and my whole team can see that in my calendar. I've always had an open Google Calendar, so people hopefully can see, I'm role modeling that, and it's fine with me if they do that too, or, other things that they might be important to them. I get energy from other people. I am, I suppose, a bit of an extrovert in that sense in the Myers-Briggs scale. So I do some things with other groups of people. I'm in a couple book clubs because I love to read, and then we go and meet and talk about the book. You've probably seen this, most book clubs, you're lucky if out of 2 hours, they can focus on the book for 15 minutes and then it's kind of social. So that's great. And I'm also trying to learn to play Mahjong. So that involves groups of people. So I guess having some things that create, social support group and just a way to get away from work and other things. And the last thing, which I don't recommend for anybody because I think it's a very bad habit, but I drink a Diet Dr. Pepper almost every morning. It's a big challenge. It's hard to get in Singapore, a little bit hard to get in Australia, very easy in the US. And then when I was working in Latin America, I discovered Guarana Zero, which the Arctic one. So, which I can sometimes get in Australia now because there are more Brazilians in eastern suburbs. So I do have a diet soda every morning. So maybe that's the secret, but I don't drink coffee. So.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. One of the key messages of this podcast is to share with those who listen to it what mentors and leaders like you, the way that leaders and mentors like you turn the day-to-day or the ordinary in a day-to-day into something extraordinary. So how do you do that?
You make it sound like magic, and I don't think it is. I think every day is extraordinary because most days are a good day. I think I talk a lot in the book about stamina, and I don't think stamina is like just grit. Grit's important. If you listen to Angela Duckworth, grit's really important, but I don't think you want to spend your career or your life grinding it out. Stamina is like perseverance. There are going to be some knocks, like the example I talked about with Kathy, but most of the time things can be fun. So I think it's perseverance plus enthusiasm. I think I wasn't either popular or good looking enough in high school to be a cheerleader. And so I've become an adult cheerleader. Maybe that's what I want to be when I grow up. And so I feel like most of the time I'm, if I can help other people either on my team or through the book, overcome a stumble or have a better career than, they were already having. that really gives me a lot of feeling of getting something from ordinary to extraordinary. So I guess it's enthusiasm, stamina, cheerleading.
I love that. I love that. And perseverance. Thank you. I love that. Thank you very much for sharing that. And thank you very much for spending this time with us here at Entre Mentores DLC. Before we head out, I just want to acknowledge you for being an amazing leader. I certainly learned a lot from you, and I keep learning from you. I read your columns. I'm looking forward to reading the book, and I hope that we can get to catch up very, very soon. So thank you again very much for being here in Entre Mentores DLC.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. You too. Y muchas gracias a todos ustedes por escuchar este episodio y todos los episodios de Entre Mentores DLC. Recuerden, este es un programa semanal, así es que si no lo han hecho ya, suscríbanse al mismo y compartan este y todos los episodios de Entre Mentores DLC. Yo soy Efraín Mendicuti y esto es Entre Mentores DLC. Hasta la próxima.